Okay, we're live.
We're going to reconvene our afternoon hearing and continue the conversation on clean water service providers and welcome Hillary Solomon.
Thank you. Hillary Solomon with the Poultney Meadowy Natural Resources Conservation District. And I work in partnership with the Rutland Regional Planning Commission to help with the South Lake clean water service provider. I'm just going to start with a little bit a really quick background on the conservation district so you kind of understand the perspective from which I speak toward this work. We're part of state government, so our Natural Resources Conservation Council is a state agency, and the 14 different conservation districts that cover the state of Vermont are subdivisions of state government. We provide statewide coverage, and in states that have county government, often conservation districts are part of county government. We work with both federal partners and state partners, very closely tied with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and helping them with our outreach and sort of helping facilitate that farm bill spending and the practices, the water quality and other practices that happen on farms, as well as working very closely with state government. Conservation districts generally implement projects in a number of different project areas. Agricultural water quality obviously was one we started back in the Dust Bowl, focused on agricultural and soil health and water quality projects. We now work on a wide variety of natural resource projects. We also work on stormwater projects and develop plans in the towns. We do a lot of assessments, trying to just make sure that we understand the resource concerns that are in our districts, and identifying projects so that we can then later implement them. And then most conservation districts have education and outreach programs. We have a native plant nursery, so our educational programming is centered around that native plant nursery, with both, school groups coming to help, volunteer opportunities, that type of thing, stream tables, watershed models, all very watershed science based.
How many staff do you have?
I have 6 right now, including myself. So we've always worked closely with the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. We provide very complementary services. We had always been largely the natural resource and the project implementers in that realm. They had been more focused on roads and planning, and sort of other engagements with municipalities. They have very good in-house mapping services. They have a dedicated financial person, and they have very robust sort of data storage systems. So we ended up deciding to partner on this application. We'd also worked together on some complicated water quality projects over the years, so we were familiar with each other. So we applied together and were awarded the position as the South Lake WISP. This is our area, so it is pretty much exactly the Poultney Meadowy Conservation District, and then half of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission's district or area. And then it goes up that South Lake Direct, the pink purple watershed goes up into that. It's in Addison County for the most part, a little bit in Rutland County. So that would be, normally that would be the Addison County Regional Planning Commission. Normally that would be the Otter Creek Conservation District. So there is a little shuffling around of sort of areas that we normally work in as part of this, and part of getting started is getting to know those areas that we don't normally work in. And then Addison County Regional Planning Commission is working on the Otter Creek watershed, and so they drop down then into Rutland County in the white side of the map on my right. So again, this is a new funding delivery mechanism. So it's a new system of grant making. The QUISP is charged with overseeing the identification, development, implementation, and then ensuring sort of ongoing maintenance of these projects that we're implementing. The Basin Water Quality Council helps to guide decisions, and they also have final say on which projects are funded. And then the projects have to meet very strict criteria, as you've heard, and we can talk about that. I know there are a lot of questions around those criteria. That's based on the modeling for the CMDL. The Basin Water Quality Councils, Chris already went over this membership, and I'm going to go, that slide actually gets into more specifics. Yeah. So for us, we don't have the traditional watershed groups in our area that other QUISPs have in their area or other counties. So I think that the Nature Conservancy and the Pulteney Meadowy Conservation District had been acting as watershed groups in that area, sort of without those entities there. And that's something that's happened on the ground where there are gaps in service. Other entities sort of will provide those services. So we have Vermont Land Trust as our land conservation organization on our Basin Water Quality Council. The conservation districts right now are Pulteney, Meadowy, and Bennington, the watershed groups. So we sort of asked for special permission to have the Nature Conservancy and a representative from TU National, Aaron Rogers, who works quite a bit in our area, is very familiar with it. They're on as our watershed groups. And then the Rutland and Addison County RPCs have members on our Basin Water Quality Council. Oh, sorry. I'm talking about partners on this slide. So those are the people on our Basin Water Quality Council. Our other partners in the area who help facilitate projects coming to be funded are lake associations. We have some that are actively working to bring us projects, and then landowners in the area. Sorry, I was a little bit talking about, but hopefully that's clear. I think I'm accidentally, sorry, I just missed a slide. That's what happened. So I had started, these slides are about how we get projects and how we're sort of doing that outreach and facilitating projects going forward, and then what methods are out there already that are producing projects. So a source of projects was our partners who we just talked about, and then these are the different types of assessments that lead to project identification, project prioritization, including just landowners and towns who come forward with projects as they identify them. So those projects that come to us then have to go through the sort of filter of the clean water funding policy. So the funding policy that dictates how the Clean Water Fund is spent. And you can see this looks complicated, and there are a lot of different, there's different sectors and project types and project phases. And so these projects kind of bounce through this sort of a decision tree to figure out if they're fundable, if they're not fundable, and sort of where they fit into, what milestones are associated with these projects and how exactly they're going to move forward in the system. We have applications for projects. We really want to facilitate as many projects getting implemented as possible. So we accept applications on a rolling basis. We provide any assistance that our partners need in terms of helping them get those applications filled out, in terms of helping them get information that they need in order to figure out if their project's going to be cost effective or not. Our Basin Water Quality Council meets quarterly, and any project applications that have been submitted to us at that point, they vote on. The QUISP staff reviews the projects and then provides this a project review sheet to our book members. And that project review sheet is based on our formula grants and the provisions in the formula grants, and that's the cost efficiency. And so you had asked about the sort of average cost per kilogram. So they're different in each watershed, and because we have more project types that are allegedly less expensive, our QUISP actually has less dollars per kilogram to spend per project, per kilogram reduced. So the average for us, if we meet our targets in our formula grant, is about $9,000 per kilogram of phosphorus reduced. At this point, we are allowing for costs that are a little bit higher just because we want to keep projects moving. And I'll talk about this later, but it's actually really hard to get projects that come in meeting that cost efficiency. We look at the life expectancy of a project because we wanted to make sure that its design life is longer rather than shorter. We look at the complexity and cost of ongoing maintenance for these projects because that would be a factor. And people, as we cover those maintenance costs, we want to make sure that these projects are long-lived and not too complex. And then we look at the value of the project within the larger goals of the basin. So does it meet goals of our technical basin plan? Does it meet community goals? Does it meet, the goals of the community? And then does it provide co-benefits? So are we looking at projects that also do other great things for the environment? Does it have a flood resilience component or a habitat component or an education and outreach component? And so projects are scored. There's a score, we get 100 if it met all of these criteria in the best possible way. Most projects come in between 60 and 80 is a typical score for projects. And often the cost efficiency is the one that is detracting.
So when you have a project that has multiple co-benefits, are you able to piece together the funding sources? Is there enough flexibility in this clean water service provider model to allow for that?
So I'm gonna go back to the dam, there were questions about dams. So we had a project that was a dam removal. It was an expensive project. It was over $200,000 to remove this dam. It was a dam removal and a bridge replacement. So that work was it was already happening in the area of Trout Unlimited, the Conservation District, and a bunch of partners. And we had about 1.5 kilograms of phosphorus that was, there was a floodplain restoration as part of this project. And so we came in and just had the QUISP paid for that part of the project, that floodplain restoration. And so they partnered in with the rest of the partners. And if that hadn't happened, like we were running out of sources of funding for that project because the sources were older sources that weren't being in use anymore. And so that helped, that really got that project across the finish line. That was implemented. It's been in place for a year now. So yes, there is some flexibility to have the QUISP sort of pay for the phosphorus reduction, and then other funders might come in, independent funders or, other sources, not non-state sources might come in and pay for it. It's a way to leverage funds. So then operations and maintenance, again, is a new piece of this. And so we want to make sure that projects are cost efficient into the future. But it's a great opportunity also to promote these sort of long-term projects with property owners. And one of our success stories is that we have adopted a few projects that were done in prior years. And I think that's my next slide. Oh, no, it's not. It's in one more slide, but I'll get to it. So we have a couple of things that we're really excited about, and I wanted to share those with you today. One is something that we've kind of nicknamed our early stage funds, and it's sort of this little pot of funds that was approved by the Basin Water Quality Council. When we get a project in that's brought to us by a town or landowner, so we already sort of have a willing partner here. We have just a small amount of funds per project to hire a consultant. We go out with a consultant. They look at the project, they do some desktop review quickly. We try and figure out what's the watershed sort of draining to this project, like how much land are we treating? How much phosphorus are we going to reduce? What type of project is this going to be? And we get a sense about whether that's going to move forward through our program, or it might get bumped to like an enhancement grant or a different funding source. So that's been great. We've had 11 projects come through. So these are projects that are not already prioritized. We don't have any background information on them. They did not come from an existing assessment, but they came from somebody who wanted to implement the project. So 11 of those projects have come through. There are 11 locations, but for each location, there might be multiple projects. So it's been like 1 to 5 projects in each of these locations that all have different phosphorus reduction credits. And then we have done this as a QUISP, but this is something that our partners also could apply to do and have this sort of similar pot of funds that helps them characterize these projects. Because it feels like there's a lot of pressure to get projects on the ground. And this is one way that we can make decisions sort of quickly without having to go through an entire stormwater master plan or something that takes a couple of years.
This is part of your QUISP budget.
Yeah. We just had we have put in a grant request to our Basin Water Quality Council, which is what we have to do, what we do when we want to use funds for a project. And this is a project type, project development.
Oh, that the Conservation District is lead on.
What's that?
But the Conservation District is the lead on.
Well, in our role as the QUISP, so we're partnered with the Regional Planning Commission on this grant also.
What is your budget for how much is your QUISP allocation?
For the South Lake, I think it's like $977,000 a year. But that's not, yes, that's to the QUISP. So anyhow, that's one of our sort of success stories. And then the other one is the project adoption. So we are the first QUISP to adopt projects. We've adopted 3 projects. These are projects that were implemented by the Conservation District. One of them is right at the entrance to town. Some very weedy rain gardens that maybe could look a lot nicer and be a better sort of advertisement for these type of projects. One is a stormwater project that's right on Lake St. Catherine. Again, trying really hard to work with shoreline homeowners. We've had a lot of folks from the shore of Lake Champlain also I think 4 or 5 of our 11 locations in that early stage fund are right on the shore of Lake Champlain, direct drainages right into the lake. So having a nice example of a project that's well maintained on somebody's shoreline property is great, great advertising. And then a buffer planting on a farm that we'd like to make sure stays.
Representative Pritchard.
Yeah, I'm curious, what is the project on St. Catherine?
It's on Ferncliff Road.
Okay,
And it's a series of these settling pools, so it actually collects water from multiple acres upstream that drains across the road, picks up sediment as it
off the
comes,
hill.
comes off the hill,
from
exactly,
Where
yeah.
the teeters are in that area?
It's further back toward the end, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
towards the
towards the
lily
end of
pond.
it. Past Lily Pond, all the way toward the end, go all the way to the end.
And you've made, so what have you done there? You,
We created these settling pools, so water comes off the
Okay.
hillside, it goes into a
Yeah.
culvert, and then it comes out the culvert on this property, and it was just draining down sort of a eroded ditch, and had no treatment at all. So now it
Yeah.
pools, it's like little step pools.
Okay.
And then we go and we clean out the sediment that's in those pools. So again, a landowner who's agreed to have this practice on their property, and we want to make sure that we keep it maintained for them.
Sorry, is that on their property or on the road?
It's on their property.
Representative Ted with you.
You said you'd clean out some of these settling ponds. Where's the material go to that's been cleaned out? Because I'm very curious. I keep coming back to dams because I have a project in mind. That's why I keep coming back to it. And I know my personal frustrations from what I heard about the project. That's why.
Okay, yeah, so we've cleaned it out. So this project is a couple years old. We've cleaned it out at one time and it had a lot of leaves in the top,
Mhm.
leaves and sediment. So we took that back to our nursery actually and composted it. But the next time we do this, we'll pay and have a small excavator come in. And so that will be disposed then appropriately by that contractor.
And what's entailed in disposal? Is it actually tested for nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients before it's taken to another site for deposit?
No, I mean, this would be similar to cleaning out a roadside ditch or something where it's all
organic.
yeah, it's organic material, right? So we want to just make sure that it's not in the direct line of drainage toward water. So
Mhm.
back at our nursery, it's very sandy, we can mix it into our planting beds.
Use it
It's
as a
all
soil
being, yeah,
amendment.
it's all being contained, exactly. And the contractors have places that they take, clean fill basically, but again, with the nutrients in it, we don't want it going into the lake, so. Okay, so now on to challenges. So as you've heard today, the formula grant is very specific. It's based on the modeling for the TMDL. So in anticipation of this happening, after the legislation was passed in 2019, the Poultney Meadowy Conservation District worked with Fitzgerald Environmental to identify projects because we felt like there was going to be a lot of opportunity and some funding available to fund projects. So we worked between 2016, which was actually after the Clean Water Act was enacted, through 2022. And we identified 200 projects. Of course, some of this was before we knew that there was going to be the cost efficiency. So we didn't have, for some of them, we don't have all the data we need to figure out the cost efficiency. But of those 200 projects, with the ones that have enough data, we had 13 of them that actually meet the criteria of this grant. And of those 13, only 2 had greater than 1 kilogram of phosphorus reduction. So we're working in an area that has smaller rivers, smaller agricultural fields, small towns. So we may not have these big projects with huge phosphorus reductions. We have a lot of projects with a little phosphorus reduction. And then so we're transitioning how we look at projects and trying to find ones that are better going to fit this model. But another challenge we've had is that the project types that are allowed in the Clean Water Fund through the Clean Water Funding Policy right now are very limited. So of those, this is from our early stage fund, from 4 locations, there were 14 projects identified, estimated 133 kilograms of phosphorus that we could reduce through projects that were cost effective and met the formula. But none of those projects were allowed currently in the CWIP funding policy.
They meet the formula, but they're not allowed.
Right, they're not a project type that's allowed. So an example of that would be gullies in developed areas are allowed, but gullies in agricultural areas are not allowed currently under the clean water funding policy.
Because they have access to other funding.
I think it's actually because they haven't developed the methodology yet they don't believe that they can accurately calculate how much phosphorus would be reduced from those projects. And so they don't want to move forward with them at this point. And Chris is right here.
Is that accurate?
I think that's part of it. It's accurate that we don't currently have a phosphorus accounting methodology for that project type for agricultural gullies. Again, this is not my area of expertise. I have colleagues that would be better equipped to answer this, but I think there's also a concern that the gully, you want to also stabilize the cause of the gully upstream. So you need to have like some sort of settlement above the gully, and then in an agricultural system, it's different than in other systems. So it's very nuanced and complicated when you're dealing with farms and the practices that happen there. And that's about as much as I can explain without needing to defer to somebody else's a little bit more experience.
Sites are,
Yeah, I got it.
they're amazing. And, you know, if you ever wanted to take a field trip and come down to our area, I mean, the one of the gullies is incredible. It's deep, it's moving really fast. It's on flat farmland. And the drainage.
I'm familiar with those types.
Yeah, right. It's right off 22, north of Fairhaven. So it would be a great spot to work. There are other issues. So I could come and give a whole presentation about that one project, and the ways that it doesn't meet the QUIP funding policy. But just the take home is just that it's complicated, and some types that could be really helpful are not at this point able to move forward.
Representative Tagliavia and then Nora.
Yes, I got a question for each of you. Define what you mean by a gully, please. How does that differ in size and scope or whatever from, say, a grass swale?
This,
Just so I can picture it.
we have a variety of gullies in those 4 projects I talked about. Some are happening because streams are becoming deeper in their banks, and so that depth is working its way up little tributaries into farm fields. So you'll see it's very raw. The soil is actively moving. There's no vegetation on these banks. The gullies, one set of gullies is maybe 3 feet deep. The other gully that I was just talking about is 50 feet deep, and it moved 30 feet last year with a 5-foot head cut drop. So it's moving very fast. It's sloughing in all along the sides of it. It's sandy. It's a glacial deposits. It's sandy. Nothing's holding it together. And just
Right into a farm field?
goes into, yeah, the farmer's given up that field at this point, but somebody bought it and is trying to put a house on it, and the whole thing is so active, it doesn't feel safe. But all this is draining directly into the Polteny River.
Representative North.
Question on that, same thing, are these types that you're allowed to work on specified in statute? And if so, is that something we can change? And if so, what types would you like to see added? And can we get a list?
Yeah, it's in the QUIP funding policy, which is written by DEC, and
So it's a rule, it's not statute. It's not something that legislature can define or.
I believe that's correct. What I think, from what I hear at DEC, is that they're understaffed, they have a lot to do, and so they realize that these are project types that they would like to, they're planning to create these methodologies and put them into, make them so we can work on them, but that they're short-staffed, and that's, yeah.
It's not something we, the legislature.
No, I think the thing would, I think, so my sense is that DEC's kind of moved into a regulatory sort of direction, and a lot of their staff now are regulatory. They used to have more staff that, at least as somebody on the ground, that felt like they weren't regulatory, they were technical assistant staff. And so I feel like maybe thinking about DEC and their mandate and what positions do they need that can help the people on the ground, which is what those non-regulatory positions do, get projects implemented, that would be very helpful. Yeah, and so similarly then, the phosphorus reductions are sort of tied to the TMDL and tied to the state agencies and their funding. And so different, the V-Trans has funding to do certain things along roads, and Agency of Ag has funding to do certain things with farms. And DEC has funding to do certain things that in the project types we're talking about. And that makes it challenging too when you're working on the ground. So I had a project a couple of years ago where runoff from a horse farm met runoff from a fourth class road, came down the side of a road in Castleton, diverted off the road because of a diversion that the town had put in, went into a barn, flooded the barn, during the sort of once or twice a year events, came back onto the road, crossed the road under a culvert, and then went into a gully, right? So we had like every single sector there. We have roads and farms and natural resource issues. So we were able at that point through the older model of funding, the ERP grant, to get funding to address all that. And so we didn't let the water go through the barn, and we put it off on the other side of the road, and we stabilized the gullies, and all that was one funding source. And I think that would be really challenging to do now that things are more divided up because of this funding model. So just trying to make sure there's flexibility in the system to handle the things that are actually happening on the ground would be great. And then Chris brought this up, but the staff capacity is so limited. So there's more funding available to do more projects, but those groups on the ground don't have that sort of core funding so that they can hire more people, so that then they can take on these projects and then get paid eventually through this funding, because there are project management funds built in here. So from my perspective, the QUISPs, they get capacity building to do this water quality work in that administrative piece, that 15%. So as a QUISP, my time is covered to do this work. But there's no sort of similar stable long-term funding source for the partners on the ground who don't have enough staff and who can't dedicate the time to sort of raising all the money that they would need to hire another staff person. So there are limited funds available from DEC, from the Lake Champlain Basin Program, and from some private folks, but they're just not as stable or as long-term as those provided to the QUISPs. And that is something that is, that these bottlenecks are really slowing down our ability to have projects move quickly through the system. But ending on a positive note, our South Lake Basin Water Quality Council is really engaged, and several of the members are trying to develop their own programs and projects that are going to, sort of help overcome the formula grant constraints. They're working closely with DEC to try and get projects that they are passionate about, to create those methodologies and to create trainings, and to move forward with those project types. So the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, with great partners who are working really hard to make this work. DEC, one-on-one, everybody's fantastic. They call you back on weekends and holidays. They send you emails that, they respond at the weird times of night that you send them emails. Always really available and really happy to help. The pace of project funding and development is increasing, now that we've been doing this for a couple of years. People are starting to be more engaged, understanding how it works, and more projects are happening. I think the desire to grow capacity for project implementation is consistent across all of our partners. Everybody sees that as a need. Everybody's trying to do their best to facilitate more staff at that sort of project implementer level. And Chris mentioned this, but DEC has developed through their conversations with all of the partners a list of action items that they're trying to work on. They're trying to prioritize them so that with their limited staff, they can address the most important of these sort of barriers that we're finding. Oh, and I wasn't sure if I could answer any of the other questions from earlier. I think the landowner participation one was an interesting question as an implementer. When we have projects come to us, like a landowner has an issue that they can see and that is bothering them and that they want fixed, that's great. And we have that landowner engagement. When we have a stormwater master plan or a geomorphic assessment or some type of assessment where we're just out on the landscape and we're identifying projects. So now we're approaching the landowner and saying, well, we perceive that you might have an issue here. And they didn't really recognize that beforehand. It's harder to get landowners to engage when it's sort of that reversed approach.
It does seem like the cost per kilogram is pretty high given the scale and scope of the reductions needed. And so I think understanding that, and if, I don't know where we could get information on, I mean, I think we'll hear more about the formulas and how that's all calculated, but I think understanding the types of projects where we get the most phosphorus reduction would be helpful. And that divide between the mandatory, the regulatory reductions and the non-regulatory reductions be helpful.
And I think, so right now, we have in our formula these sort of set prices for different types of projects. So like a stormwater project has an allowance of about $15,500 per kilogram of phosphorus reduced. Whereas a project on a farm, which might be a buffer planting, has something closer to $6,000 per kilogram. And then for us, it's about 9,000 if you average all that. So 11% of our funding is in the developed lands or more expensive category. And the rest is all in the less expensive category of projects like forest, streams, and agricultural natural resource
And
projects.
that's part of your agreement with DEC as a quiz. Well, that was very helpful. That kind of information.
So right now, we're spending higher than that, but we'll have to make that up in future years. So we'll have to be below that threshold. And so we're hoping that as we get things like GOAs approved, more tree plantings, that we'll be a little high now just because we would like to keep projects moving. But that later, 4 years from now, we're going to be below the targets. And if we're not, that will come up, but that will not be good because we won't meet a target.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Representative Pritchard and then Austin.
So I'm curious, I don't know if this is out of your AOR or not, Hillary, but an area that I always thought was kind of critical because of the way it lays out is from the Gaelic Preserve, all those, the Ward Marsh, the Billings Marsh, Coarse Cats, all that flows through. Are there I think the Nature Conservancy owns that now. I'm not sure if they own this side. I know they own Gaelic Preserve, but there's all those series of, and everything goes into South Bay. So what, it seems to me that's a point, there's several points of entry.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, and so wetlands generally are thought of as, sort of cleansing nutrients out, although wetlands also are sort of high nutrient systems. That Bay Road that runs right along the Pulteney River, that floods every year, that people drive on when it's flooded.
Yeah.
That's a huge source of sediment and nutrients that could be hopefully mitigated somehow, but it would take a commitment of the whole community because people enjoy four-wheeling on that road.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is on our radar.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, I think it might tag on this question as well, but private roads that are dirt, that are not regulated, how big a problem are they?
Yeah, so there was a study done in the Mad River watershed that showed that private roads and driveways were about similar in mileage to public town roads. So yes, they are an issue, and we can work on projects on, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can work on projects on private roads, and we can work on projects on forest roads, like logging roads, if they're outside of the AMPs. But private driveways are challenging because people need to maintain their driveways. As soon as we start putting projects on driveways, we would need to make sure we maintain their driveways. So suddenly the state's maintaining everyone's driveway. So it's a challenge because it's a huge source. And in fact, I've been on driveways with undersized culverts and driveways that drain directly into the rivers. But there's that sort of conflict of.
So would
Joining us.
a project be like putting in a larger culvert so that water, let's say floodwaters could have a better.
And we are going to stay live.
Yeah, so putting in larger culverts are definitely on our radar.
I have no idea where that came from.
Don't always have to profit.
They are.
It might be a partner project,
Uh-huh.
something we do in partnership with other funding sources. At this point, we cannot do that on private roads, although we might be moving toward doing that on woods roads, which then might lead to, well, why the woods road and not the driveway? I think it's all being sort of developed right now.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your testimony.
Excellent questions too. This is really fun.
Good. Thank you. Very helpful for us. So members, next up, we have Representative Squirrel from the House Committee on Appropriations joining us. It's going to be joining us via Zoom. The agenda says we will not be live streamed, but we will be live streamed. We are going to be hearing from Representative Squirrel on Budget Adjustment Act.
Yeah.
Switching over to him now.
Once we stop sharing.
You can stop the share.
I might just make a quick point on what we just heard, $13,000 per kilogram times a total of 213 metric tons of total reduction, which comes out to $2.769 billion.
Yeah, it's big.
To clean up just Lake Champlain. So that's not even cleaning it up, that just gets to the TMDL, meeting the TMDL. $2.7 billion.
Yeah.
Our ancestors.
All right.
It's just Mother Nature.
We will.
Every lake is all about geologically founded.
Representative Squirrel, thank you for joining us. Like you are at home today.
I am. I had some things I needed to be out of the State House for, so I appreciate you letting me join by Zoom.
No problem. I'm going to ask for you. So this is our first foray into conversations about the budget. And for members new and returning, we will be having Representative Squirrel will be our budget liaison for our areas of budget. And I think we will learn that the Budget Adjustment Act is not a huge thing this year for our committee, but I thought it would be a very good exercise for us actually to all meet Representative Squirrel. And also if you could help us understand the Budget Adjustment Act and what's happening, maybe even highlights of what's going on with it outside of our committee, like if there's bigger things that we might want to know about. And then just share with us the kind of ups and downs for our area of jurisdiction in the Budget Adjustment Act this year.
Okay. Representative Trevor Squirrel, House Appropriations, thanks for having me. The Budget Adjustment Act is the mid-year adjustment to the fiscal year budget. So we pass a budget, goes into effect in July 1 and finishes up this year. We're in the FY25 budget period right now. So the budget adjustment we get from the administration is the governors recommend that comes from the departments and the agencies regarding any adjustments they might want to make at this point in time. And it can't wait for, let's say, the next budget cycle, which is the FY26 budget, which we'll hear next Tuesday. And then we'll start taking it up in our committee probably a week from this coming Monday. What we typically do is we invite departments and agencies to come in and speak to any changes that are requested in the Budget Adjustment Act. And then, of course, we reach out to the committee's jurisdiction to see what they think about those recommendations, and also whether the committees themselves might have some interest in proposing some changes either to the governor's recommend or to things that aren't put into the budget or haven't been addressed in the budget adjustment from the administration. So we're looking for feedback from committees regarding what's in it, but also whether you might have suggestions for other things you might want to take up as opposed to taking them up in the actual budget itself. We'll also have a public meeting. I believe it's tomorrow afternoon where the public can weigh in on things before the Appropriations Committee and the budget adjustment. And we'll vote it out, probably do a straw poll a week from tomorrow, a week from Friday, I should say. And then we'll vote it out of the committee on the following Monday or a week from this coming Monday. So that's the general approach to it. The budget adjustment for the Agency of Natural Resources is actually quite modest this year. They have three items. One is $34,700 for the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, and then $28,000 and by the way, these are all general fund dollars. There's no special funds involved here. 28,000 general fund for Department of Environmental Conservation, then a separate $8,000 increase in general fund for the Department of Environmental Conservation. Specifically, the 34,700 for Forest Parks and Recreation. I'm sure you're aware of that. Central and Southern Vermont were in a drought this past summer, and we've had a lot more fire than what we typically have experienced. And unfortunately, I think this might be a more common theme for us in years going forward. So the 34,700 is 33,200 in additional payroll costs for the department. And then there was $1,500 for town reimbursement for that activity. The DEC increases in both appropriations were changes in laboratory testing fees at the what's called the Vermont Agriculture and Environmental Laboratory, and that's managed by the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets. The first was 28,000 increase for air and waste management for their testing, and another 8,000 increase for the Office of Water Programs, again, for testing. Again, these are quite insignificant given the size of the budget. They're probably going to have a budget FY26 of about $320 million this coming cycle. So it's small. In my conversation with the department, sort of saying, well, why couldn't you just absorb that? I think the answer to that is that they have absorbed a lot of other things that have taken place. We've seen a number of increases across departments and agencies with the bill back from the Agency of Digital Services. They're not asking for that here, and there are a couple other things they didn't ask for. We just absorbed them, but felt like they needed to at least make this modest request. So those are the three that are in there right now. I think it might be worth noting, and there might be some things that you might have already touched on that are not here, that I think have been contemplated, and probably will show up in the FY26 budget unless this committee has other thoughts about that. Fish and Wildlife, I know, are looking for a game warden reclassification, which is about $300,000. Also, the capital budget that was passed last year had asked for Fish and Wildlife to do a study around the Salisbury Fish Hatchery and what some alternative options might be for either keeping that open or for readjusting programs across the state to adjust for the broodstock program that they have there. They were asked to do that study. $100,000 was made available to them, but didn't make it into the final budget out of the conference committee. So they need to do a more extensive study of that, whatever they might decide they want to do with that. That's probably another $350,000. And I know that you've been speaking about or discussing the issue with the EPA and the Clean Water Act between ANR and Ag. And I have some concerns about resources that might be required to implement what it is they might want to do going forward. And again, I'm sure you're raising the same kinds of questions. Anyway, that's what I have.
Great, that's helpful. Although I'm gonna rewind a little to the BAA piece of this and ask about the lab testing fees. Does that mean the fee coming in is not covering the cost of the lab work being done?
No, these are fees from Ag because they run the lab and they're billing ANR.
So their
The
money,
fees have gone up, yeah.
is more money coming into DEC through the lab?
No, I would say they're having to pay out more money from on the budget line for lab testing over and above their budget. ANR has a budget line for lab testing. That money going to the Ag run lab, and the expenses are exceeding the budget line.
Okay, so we're doing more testing than we thought we'd be doing.
Yes. And the fees are a little bit higher than what they had anticipated.
Okay, so like interagency fees have gone up.
Essentially, yes.
Do members have questions on the BAA part of this? Or other parts? Representative North?
Yeah, just a question, within, ANR and its associated departments. Are there staff positions that have not been filled this year that are thus causing less expenditure during the year? And if so, I'm interested in knowing why are they still asking for these relatively, albeit relatively small, increases mid-year?
Yeah, if you're asking about programming within ANR that's under resourced, I would say yes. There's probably a number of programs that are under resourced. We had passed some legislation last year. I don't know the details that were around dams and some flooding issues, and I believe the bill had asked for 15 positions. Those 15 positions were in fact created, but at the final budget that came out of the conference committee at the end of the year last year, only 11 positions were funded. I don't think it's an immediate problem for them because they're still finalizing filling up those 11 positions, but it will be a problem going forward. In my conversation a few weeks ago with leadership at the Agency of Natural Resources, I've asked them to put together a document that spells out where they feel they may be under-resourced across the various programs that they're being asked to run. And in addition, looking at for instance, last year we added $40 million in federal funds to the ANR budget. Their budget has gone from about 125 million in 2018 and will probably exceed 300 million in FY26. So that's a tremendous increase in programming. Very difficult for any organization, regardless of the money being provided, to provide, have the required resources to make that work. But I want a better understanding of where they feel those issues are. And then I will also be probably, in addition to them coming to your committee, probably speaking to this committee about that also as we move forward.
All right. Thank you for that. I don't see any further questions for you.
I'm good with that.
Thanks for joining us and thanks for being our liaison.
Yes, and any members of the committee, if you have questions, you see me walking around or want to chat about things related to ANR, please feel free to do so. I'd like to help as best I can.
Thanks, Representative Squirrel.
Okay, take care.
So if members, we have been asked by the chair of appropriations to weigh in if we have concerns. I'm not seeing concerns, and if that's accurate.
Just on a really big picture, like at the federal level, is there any concern about not getting the money that we think will be appropriated to us?
You mean because of the changes in the, I'm sure there is.
There is, okay.
I'm sure that there is concern about previously dependable sources of federal funding changing. Yeah, we'll hear about that.
But there's probably no concern about funds that have already been obligated.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the 320 million, it has already been obligated?
26.
Yes.
That's what, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
great. So, with that, with no objection from the committee, I will write a note to the chair saying that we're okay with this proposal. Fair.
Relatively small additions, they were asking less than 100K.
In the BAA, yeah. Great. Okay, great. So with that, we are adjourned for the afternoon. Public service announcement, we do have a caucus of the whole after the floor. So have some time on the floor today. We'll see you on the floor.
Great, thank you.
the live stream.